Welcome to the Children's Tradition Podcast, where we introduce families to the poetic life. Hello, everyone. My name is Patrick Foss, and I'm here with my wife, Amanda Foss. And we're thrilled and excited to be able to talk to Mr. Joshua Gibbs today, someone who anytime I get the opportunity or the privilege to be able to talk with him, I'm always grateful. Mr. Gibbs is the director of the Classical Teaching Institute at the Ambrose School in Boise, Idaho. He has 19 years of experience teaching classic literature in Christian schools. He's also a lecturer on pedagogy and great books. He's an author of How to Be Unlucky, Something They Will Not Forget, The 25th, Love What Lasts, as well as the pamphlets, A Short Introduction to Classical Christian Education. And so you parents want to send you to a classical Christian school. That's a great title, by the way. He's a frequent conference speaker at the Searcy Institute, as well as other classical organizations. He's the creator of the In the Trenches podcast and the Proverbial podcast. Josh is married to Paula, and they have 2 daughters. So Mr. Gibbs, welcome. That is quite the resume.
Thank you. Thank you. Very glad to be here. Thanks for the invitation.
Absolutely. Well, like I said, I'm always thrilled to be able to talk to you. I know I kind of had a fanboy moment with you at I think it was the 2024 ACCS conference, where I just sort of walked up to you and we shared our love.
Other people look for celebrities in the wild, and we're like, Josh
classical
Gibbs.
educator. Yeah, and we got to bond and share over our love over Jurassic World.
That was a great conversation. There was so much to say.
There was much to say. Well, I've been quite familiar with your work for some time, especially going back to the Classical U days. And of course, the first thing I noticed is that was kind of just my introduction. It was you and Dr. Perrin with really just classical education. It was not something I received or was raised with, nor really was Amanda. And I just remember seeing you, I think, on those video casts being like, the guy's beard just draws you in and fundamentally seems traditional and a classicist. So, and you continue to impress, I can tell.
You're very kind. Thank you.
I keep trying. Well, one of your works that, of course, that I've been able to have conversations with you about over the past couple of years is Love What Lasts. And I know that book's been out for a couple of years, and excited for you to be able to kind of dive in with you about that. And I remember Amanda gave me the book and said, hey, I want you to read this and look over it, because I'm definitely somebody who grew up on pop culture, pop entertainment. And I remember opening it up, and one of the first things it said was Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom. And immediately I felt this sense of kindred. I grew up on monster films, dinosaurs, Godzilla, and everything. So I thought, man, this is great. And then I kept reading, and I found out it's actually confessional, not affirmational. And so, but nevertheless, it showed me, I probably need to expand my interest and go through all of that. So, but I'd love to just kind of, what prompted you to write a book on loving what has stood the test of time, loving what is enduring?
Oh, well, I grew up probably a lot like yourself. I grew up with a very steady diet of pop culture. And my interest in pop culture was more or less unmitigated until it was some point in my late 20s or early 30s. I was probably about 30 years old. And I started having some health problems in my 30s. And I remember it was, I think that the idea for the book, even though I didn't start working on the book until I was 38, I think. I think I started working on Love What Lasts when I was 38, and it took 5 years to finish it. Or 37. I know it was 5 years in the making. But the seed for the book, or the germ for the book, came when I was about 30 years old. And I started having some health problems, and I started having heart palpitations. My heart would skip a beat. And this feels like ancient history now, because I'm talking back to a time when I worked in Pensacola, Florida. And I think I only had one child at the time, and it was Camilla. She was an infant, so it feels like a very, very long time ago. But I was in a state of constant anxiety over these skipped heartbeats, and they might only happen once every 2 or 3 days. But it was extremely alarming. And I remember quite distinctly a certain night when I was out running an errand, and I was in the car. I was by myself, and I was returning home, and I got into the car, and my heart skipped a beat. And it's if you've never had it happen, it's kind of alarming to know that your heart is not beating, even if it's only to know it for 1 second, 2 seconds. And I had to recalibrate my thoughts, find my keys, put them in the ignition. And the drive home was about a 10-minute drive home. And there was a CD player in the car. And there were 2 CDs in the passenger seat next to me. And they were both CDs that I listened to somewhat frequently. One was Power, Corruption, and Lies by New Order. And the other was a Rachmaninoff All Night Vigil. And I had this weird moment of realization when I was sitting there in the car and I was looking at these 2 CDs. It didn't seem like there were just 2 CDs in the seat next to me. It seemed like there was this important decision in the car seat next to me. And I could choose either one of these. And I had this thought that the choice that I was going to make may or may not have significance later on. And I know that's a very generic way of putting it. It's a very amorphous way of putting it. But I had this thought that one of these pieces of music, listening to one of these pieces of music, might be beneficial to me at some point in the future. And one of them might not be beneficial to me. So it wasn't some kind of realization like some young men have that they're listening to really appalling rap records, the kind of thing that you wouldn't play in front of your mother, and they think, oh, I need to get rid of this. This is really disgusting. Like, there's nothing disgusting about New Order. New Order is just a 80s pop band. But I had this thought that someday, it was hard for me to imagine that someday I would be glad that I had listened to New Order on the drive home. But there was something about the Rachmaninoff where I could imagine it wasn't absurd to imagine being glad that I had listened to that at some point in the future. And that very simple judgment that one of these might be beneficial, whereas the other was simply neutral, was one that cast this long shadow over the way that I approach all artistic objects, all cultural objects forever after. And again, this is not some things are good and some things are bad. It's more like all things are allowable, but not all things are profitable, as St. Paul puts it. So it's totally allowable to listen to New Order. I wouldn't tell anyone that's the devil's music. Don't listen to New Order. But I could genuinely say that even though it was allowable to listen to New Order, I couldn't imagine it being profitable. Whereas I could imagine it being profitable to have listened to this Rachmaninoff All Night Vigil. And I would say that rather simple realization, just this binary realization, this is better for me than this, was one that kind of spread like leaven throughout all the decisions I made about what I listened to and what I watched. And even when I wasn't making great choices over what I watched, I still had that decision in the back of my mind.
Well, I think that type of choice is one that we can all imagine. If it's not music for us, maybe it's food, maybe it's a book, maybe it's a TV show. I
Clothes.
think yeah, right. Well, we're whatever. There's so many. I think in the beginning, the intro of Love What Lasts, you talk about that somewhere it said that people are scrolling on Netflix for 100 hours
Every
a year just to make a decision.
That's
so,
right.
I mean, you have the choice, and then you have the time we spent making those choices, and even the paralysis that might set in when those choices come.
Yeah, but like you said, I think particularly along those lines, you're not looking for something right rich or deep to actually expand your soul. You're looking for something to alleviate your boredom.
Right.
Something just
huge difference.
Yeah. And so I guess, so when you were looking at these different songs, was fundamentally the other thing more profitable because it was older? And because it's older, it's something more enriching?
That was latent to the decision, but it wasn't one that I processed at the time. It was, one of these is spiritual and the other one is secular. One of these is religious, one of these is Christian, and the other one of these is secular. And I would say that that's what the decision was ultimately based on. And at the time, I was teaching the Divine Comedy, and so I think I was even teaching the Purgatorio, and I was noting on whatever read it was probably only the second or third read. I was noting all the songs that are sung in the Purgatorio, and it struck me that that I might someday, after I died, sing the music in the Rachmaninoff piece. That it would be valuable after I was dead to know this music. Whereas it's impossible to imagine singing "Dreams Never End" by New Order in the life to come.
Yeah, it almost seems like your opening illustration in the book, especially you give going to the movie theater, right?
Right.
With Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom and
Yeah.
First Reformed, right? Where the
Right.
idea of, right, not only in the present, but in the afterlife, the idea of talking about faith and all that, the condition of your soul. Contrast to, you're probably not going to talk about mutated dinosaurs
Right.
in 5 weeks or 5 minutes after that.
Right.
I mean, because that's just roller coaster entertainment. So it seems like fundamentally, if something actually even affects you in the afterlife, but I think we could even think even less than that, right? If something even affects me tomorrow rather than 5 minutes, that I would say then has a superiority,
Sure.
right?
Agreed.
In the 5-minute thing.
Agreed. Yeah. If it's going to last, if the fruit of some experience you have with a song or a film or a book is going to last into tomorrow, if it's going to be food for thought tomorrow, as opposed to the kind of thing that you quite literally forget about the second it's over, then you're getting a higher return on your time for that which lasts longer. And again, as St. Paul says, we have to be very careful how we live, doing everything that we can to redeem our time. And anything that gives you food for thought for days, weeks, months is a higher return on your time. You're getting more for your time than something that you're done with forever the second the initial experience is over.
Right. In terms of actually engaging, so maybe maybe I won't confine this necessarily to film. We'll just kind of broaden it out.
Yeah.
But in terms of just determining, this has had enough longevity for us to trust it, for us to participate with it, for us to receive it, for us
Right.
to pass it on. What is that time length? Is it 5 years, 10 years? Is it 100 years? Is it 200 years? 500
Yeah.
years? What's the length?
I would
Or am I being
say,
too rigid here? Maybe I'm being too rigid.
I don't know that you're being too rigid. I would say that there's a variable standard, and it depends. I would say it depends on what the thing is, and what the standard of longevity is for that thing. So, like for example, in America, like America as a country, America is not very old, which means that cars reach classic status at just 25 years in this country. You can get a classic car license plate issued by the state at the point that the car is 25 years old. You can get an antique car license plate at the point the car is 50 years old. In other countries, 50 years old is practically brand new. Like in England, you go through a bookstore in England and you find books that are 100, 150 years old, and no one cares. No one thinks, oh, wow, this is 100 years old. It must be worth a lot of money. No, not when your nation's over 1,000 years old. No one really cares about something that's 100 years old. So I think that there's, it's impressive. It's more impressive if a film is still discussed 50 years on than it is if a book is discussed 50 years on. It's more impressive if a piece of music is discussed, 50 years later, than if a piece of music's discussed, like if a pop song's still being talked about 50 years later. It's far more impressive than if a pop song's being spoken about like 10 to 15 years later. That's pretty easy. So it depends what your threshold is. I think that generally speaking, you're better served finding things that are older. But that's a rule of thumb. That's not like a hard and fast rule. So if given the choice between a movie that came out last week and a movie that came out 50 years ago, if the movie's still around 50 years later, the movie that's 50 years old is probably better than the movie that came out last week. And that's more to do with odds than it is with anything else. But I would say that there are certain thresholds that a thing reaches that are singularly impressive. And in Love What Lasts, I argue that 100 years, anything that is still around 100 years after the death of the person who made it, has stood the test of time in a significant way. It survived the test of time in a way that is exceedingly rare. That 100-year limit beyond the death of the creator is a significant philosophical threshold to meet. And there's a somewhat complex argument for that in the book, but I don't want to weigh everybody down with that right now.
Yeah. What is interesting, I guess a lot of that depends on what thing we're actually engaging with, right? And maybe what we're reading, watching, or maybe eating, right? Because I think, right, generally with food, right, we tend to want it fresh.
Right.
I mean, maybe not old, that made that role for that. But there are certain things like cheese, right? Wine, right? There are definitely certain things that would apply to food that would be sacred and like they'd be reverential. And then there'd be other things like, I don't know if I want chicken old.
Right.
But I think the idea of like people have been eating chicken since the beginning of, since Noah was given permission to eat animals, right? So chicken has stood the test of time.
It still has stood the test of time.
We don't want that piece of chicken, but yeah.
Just maybe, the way you consume it is maybe fresher. Yeah. But the idea of chicken, right, is still here.
Right. Which simply means that if somebody suggested you shouldn't eat chicken, there's a lot working against that claim. There's a very long human tradition of eating chicken that seems to suggest that not eating it for health reasons or ideological reasons is a kind of newfangled, fashionable claim that can't really be supported by the long haul of history. So, there's foods that last in terms of the object itself, but then there's practices of eating that abide over a long period of time. So, we're probably in this country not going to replace 3 conventional meals anytime soon. Like breakfast, lunch, and dinner is a habit that's so deeply ingrained that if somebody were to suggest our culture needs to move into a 2-meal or 4-meal habit, that the 3-meal habit is so culturally and ritualistically entrenched in our society, that's not moving anytime soon. And I don't even think it could move intentionally. So there are certain things that are so enshrined in a culture that they can't be consciously manipulated by someone. The change would have to emerge. It's not the kind of thing that could be like manipulated or altered with one person's intent or the intent of some kind of institution, because it's a habit that's human. It's not the 3-meal habit of Americans wasn't started by anyone that we can name, which means it's not going to be ended by anyone we can name.
Right. Well, and the habit, to your point, it's also somewhat ritual. We return to it. We return to it seemingly on a yearly basis, if not maybe multiple times a year. I think of that particularly in the realm of, coming up, you have the holidays coming up. And I think particularly Christmas films, you're going to have millions of people returning to watch It's a Wonderful Life.
Right.
I don't think a lot of people are going to be watching Transformers.
Right.
This Christmas, right? I don't, unless they make a new one, because that's what they have to keep shooting out to receive, and then that one's going to be forgotten in a couple months from now. But it wasn't like there was like this thing that just happened after 1946 or 1947 when it came out and said, hey, it's going to be a yearly tradition to watch It's a Wonderful Life. It's just we recognize each generation says, hey, you should know about this. Right. You should receive it. And so the idea of undoing it doesn't seem likely through one person or a podcast.
Right. That's right. If it wasn't invented by one person, it's not going to be ended by one person. Good rule of thumb.
Well, and I think this is where love becomes very central. Like so much of that in the book, that's what you're talking about, is this idea that we will love something. And so are we loving the things that are actually worth loving? And so I know I would love to hear your perspective on what do we do when so many of us, probably the majority of people, find themselves in the situation where we don't find ourselves always loving the right thing. Maybe we really look at our taste and realize, yeah, I am drawn to banal TV shows, or I am drawn to the ephemeral, and I don't want to read that hard book. It's it's exhausting, and I'd rather just pick up the easy reader, whatever it might be. I think many of us in modernity find ourselves that we have so been just fattened on ease and comfort that to turn to the good requires a degree of effort that just isn't, well, it's not easy.
Right. Yeah, we think of our bodies and our souls as functioning along completely different standards and parameters, and we're often willing to do things. We're often willing to improve ourselves in physical ways that we're not willing to improve ourselves in spiritual ways. So I think it's generally true that people don't become healthy on accident. Fat people don't get fit through chance. It's if you lose 20 pounds and you weren't trying, you might be sick. You might need to go to the doctor. Like doctors will ask you any unexplained weight loss or weight gain. Like that's a problem. Most people who lose weight do so through incredible effort. The older you get, the harder it is to lose weight. Like losing weight in your 20s is pretty easy. Losing weight in your 30s is harder. Losing weight in your 40s is almost impossible. Like the effort that you put in your 20s and what you get out of it, just in terms of getting fit and weight loss, is so much greater. And the older you get, it's like turning the Titanic around. But in the same way that improving your physical state requires effort, it requires habits. Improving your spiritual state requires effort and habits as well. And it's unpleasant. No one looks forward to losing weight, or at least nobody starts losing weight looking forward to it. Like the things that you have to do to lose weight are painful. They involve self-denial, self-abnegation. And the same thing is true of improving your taste in things, of improving your soul. And feeding your soul good things is a bit like feeding your body good things. It requires some discipline. It requires self-control, and it's not all drudgery, but it's not pleasure upon pleasure upon pleasure, which really is the way that most Americans live. They go from pleasure to pleasure, and even in the midst of unpleasant things, what gives us the strength to make it through unpleasant things is often the promise of something pleasant when we're done. So, when work sucks, you promise yourself something pleasant later on. And that's what you live for. You live for the things that make suffering worthwhile. So if the only thing that makes the suffering of your work worthwhile is the promise of a cocktail and a good meal at the end of the day, like that's what you worship. That's what gives your life meaning. The meaning of your suffering is the pleasure you get at the end of it, and that's your God. So we have to learn to suffer for some reason other than the pleasures that suffering earns us later. So like you might think of it this way: you're not going to lose weight if all of the calories that you burn in the gym are just spent on more food that you eat in the evening. If you want to get fit, the calories that you burn at the gym have to be replaced by something completely normal at the end of the day, not something outlandish. So, if you know that a pint of imperial stout is 500 calories, you could go spend an hour at the gym burning 500 calories. But if you're only doing that so that you can drink this beer, like you profit nothing in the end. If you want to profit from it, you have to work out and then not gorge at the end of the day. And I think the same thing is true on a spiritual level. That the reason why you undertake difficult things is not to justify the kind of tawdry pleasures that you want to enjoy otherwise. The goal is to develop a taste for good things. So I wouldn't encourage, and I've never encouraged someone or anyone to just quit cold turkey all the things that you enjoy. Like if you've got a thing for comic book movies, I wouldn't encourage anybody to quit comic book movies cold turkey. Just be like, never again. It's going to be tough, but never again. I think that you would, as a wise priest once put it, you would either be crushed by your failure or crushed by your success in making that kind of promise. So I always encourage something a bit more of a diet. But even in as much as you undertake a kind of spiritual diet or intellectual diet, the goal is not is not merely cutting yourself off from tawdry things. The goal is to learn a taste or to acquire a taste for good things. So it would be extremely odd if someone was reading, the works of Homer, and they had some clock next to their bed, and like for every for every chapter of, or for every book in the Iliad they read, they got to watch one dumb movie, and it really was like this slog. Like, you're going to force yourself to do it so that you earn the right to indulge in these mindless things later. I think that you need to propose some kind of program for yourself. But the goal of the program really is to learn to love what's good, not to tolerate what's good, so that you can excuse the bad things that you want to do.
Yeah, because then it just seems like it undermines it anyways. If you
Absolutely.
start to do that, because if it comes down to the telos of it, right?
Right.
So what is your aim? What is your goal? If it's, well, I'm going to incorporate this so I can just consume it through this medium to check it off, you're
Right.
still stunting your soul.
Right.
Charlotte Mason actually talks about that, of like that basically whatever we reward our children with will be what we have communicated to them is the most valuable thing. And so that is like an aspect of parenting to consider, like, just what are you even unintentionally communicating to your children is the supreme thing for them to do their chores for, or to obey you for, or to get their schoolwork done for. Because the moment you've introduced that reward, you've invalidated the value of the thing itself to a degree, because you're saying, well, your schoolwork, that is not inherently valuable. That's why I'm going to motivate you with this external thing.
Right.
Which, of course, in some things like school, there might actually be a genuine delight to be had in that thing. Of course, other things are work, and, God even rewards us for doing hard things that aren't in themselves pleasurable. So I don't think there's no place for reward, but at the same time, just considering, well, by presenting a reward, we are saying something about the value of the thing we're saying is not sufficient in and of itself. So obviously that's more geared towards like us as adults and how we're thinking about it. Now, a lot of people, because the children's tradition is based off of these, old books, classic children's literature that has stood the test of time, they're not as easy to read, right? Even Beatrix Potter is harder to read than many middle grade fiction, right?
Yeah.
So for that reason, a lot of people will be like, oh no, my 7-year-old, my 5-year-old, right? Even very young, they'll be like, I've already trained them on dumb TV shows. They only want to read cardboard books
zany,
that have no,
Blue's Clues,
right? Whatever it is.
Right.
And so then they're like, oh no, it's too late. My 5-year-old's already ruined. So what would you say to that parent who's like, okay, I'm in this situation. I didn't necessarily have wisdom about this. I started off maybe giving my children things without thought, maybe thoughtlessly. And now I'm in the situation where now when I try to read them even a simple picture book, a Kate Greenaway, they don't even want to read it because they're like, no, give me my dumb book. Give me my dumb TV show.
Right. I'm not convinced. If there's nothing in the world more addictive than cigarettes, and people quit smoking all the time. So anybody who's like, my 5-year-old sunk, I already showed him this PBS garbage. Like, keep in mind, there are people that have been smoking a pack a day for a decade, and they figure out how to quit. So don't tell me that you can't give a child better things and cut them off from just the banal, absurd garbage that our society wants them to be reared on. So first, a little perspective. Like, people quit harder things than Blue's Clues every day. Like, there is such a thing as rehab. People go. Sometimes it works. And with a little help, you can quit smoking too. So So, first things first, let's put it in perspective. The second thing I would say is that it is kind of remarkable how early in life parents are willing to throw in the towel and be like, my kid's screwed. They're never going to repair their broken soul. Like they just love comic book movies and they're 16. Parents. I've spoken with parents before who are just full of remorse at having given their teenage kids smartphones. They're like, oh, so dumb. Why did I do this? I knew it was a bad idea when I gave it to them. And as a teacher, I've heard this in parent teacher conferences. I'll say, well, you could always take it away. And they're like, oh, no, I can't do that. They'd be furious at me. Oh, okay. If your kid was smoking crack, would you not take it away from him because your child would be furious at you? It's first of all, they're not going to be furious with you in 10 years. So I would encourage you to take the long view. I don't know too many. If I thought about it, I might be able to name one. I can't name any adult I know who's still angry at their parents for cutting them off from some dumb thing they wanted to do when they were young. Like, kids are Rubbermaid, man. They get over stuff quick. It's amazing. This is the reason why we're so willing to forgive kids and even forgive teenagers for the terrible things they do if they're genuinely contrite. It's because young people are capable of remarkable change over short periods of time. Young people are capable of change in a way that adults are not. It's far harder for an adult to quit their phone addiction than it is for a 15-year-old to quit their phone addiction. First thing I'd say is there's often this kind of defeatist attitude that's an excuse for not even trying. Like any adult who's like, quitting cigarettes would be really hard. So what's the point in trying? As though many people haven't kicked that habit. The second thing I would say is that you've got a far better shot at helping your kids is almost always going to be time consuming. And the kinds of problems that kids get into are typically born out of parents who want time away from their kids. I don't know too many problems that like 5-year-olds develop or 15-year-olds develop that are developed in the presence of parents. Most problems are developed outside the view of parents. So I don't know too many parents that are like, here, let's watch Blue's Clues together. You let your kid watch Blue's Clues so that you can cook. Like, you give your kid this dumb thing to do so that you can be productive over here. And so correcting that problem is going to mean less time for you. And that's often this realization that parents have. I don't want to sugarcoat it. Like, fixing your kid's problem in terms of bad taste is going to be, it's going to be tough for your kid, but it's going to be even tougher for you because it's going to mean less free time for you. You're going to have to get involved more. And so I think that's another one of those reasons why we're hesitant to actually begin reform in our homes. It's because we know that it's going to be tough for us. And if you want to improve the taste of your kids, like, the most important thing that you can do is do whatever it is that you want them to do with them. You're going to have to do whatever you want them to do with them. So you can't put them in front of a TV and leave them alone. You have to watch things with them. And kids love it when adults watch things with them. Like, this is, like, everybody knows this. Like, when you start a movie for a kid, like, one of those questions they regularly ask is, are you going to watch it too? And I think kids feel loved when parents watch things with them. And I'm not saying you can never show your kids a movie while you make dinner. But you're definitely going to have to train them to watch decent movies. You're going to have to do that with them if you want them to do it without you. So you're going to have to show your kids movies that are worth watching while you sit next to them if you want them to be able to watch movies in your absence that are worth their time, because those movies are just not engaging the way that zany kids movies are.
Yeah, I mean, it makes me, think, I mean, so often, right, when we think about, hey, I need to change my child's taste, but really the compromised tastes are your own,
Right.
right? Where that's what really needs reform, to your point.
Right.
That's
Or the
what needs
compromised habits are yours.
yes, that's
It's either your taste or
correct.
your habits that need to change.
In the house. Yeah, I mean, it just makes me. I mean, I've gone through Love What Lasts many times now, slightly obsessively, because I want my taste to change. But I need to approach it not just on the philosophical sense. I actually need to engage it in reality, right, in terms of life. And it makes me think of Hans Christian Andersen's The Swineherd, of particularly of where you have the prince who's trying to woo the princess. And by doing that, he brings her this beautiful rose and a nightingale, and she has no interest for it, but rather he dresses with the pigs, and then she wants the glinging toy noise and the tunes and all of that, and that has her attractions more than this beautiful rose and nightingale that can sing with such a beauty, right? Because fundamentally, the tastes are so compromised, and I think that's it for us. So many with adults, and it could be our customs, our habits, our forms, all that coming in that somehow are what's quenching it or stirring it in a wrong direction, that then makes us become conformed to something else that's improper. And then we're not able to receive the thing that actually is more enduring. It becomes very difficult. Like I said, for somebody who was raised on pop culture, pop entertainment, and that was my steady diet, opening up something like Divine Comedy was just a dread. I remember initially, or Paradise Lost. I mean, let alone I couldn't understand it. But I will say, once the orientation started happening in a micro sense with other habits, then I remember revisiting something like in my own life, something like Divine Comedy and Paradise Lost. While maybe I only understood 8 or 9% of it, I could say I still saw something divine about it. I still saw something transformational about it. I still think I could say, as time went on, I need to know this. I may not know why, but I actually want to partake of this thing, even though I don't understand it.
Do you think, Josh, so obviously you said like with adults, you would recommend an incremental approach where we don't take on too much too quickly, because then we either will be puffed up with pride in our success or disheartened by our failure. Do you feel like you would recommend similarly for parents with children? Or do you think because children change faster that maybe more dramatic actions like, no, we're not going to like temper off Blue Clues, we're just going to stop watching Blue, like, do you think that maybe is more suitable for children? Or do you think the same, that we always
I think
should be?
It's far easier to do with kids than it is with adults, simply because kids are more pliable. And I would say that the kids acclimatize to things incredibly quickly too. I would say that, like, if I'm thinking about the way that I raised my own children and changes that I made in the lives of my children, I would say that children, generally speaking, require less repetition to create habits than adults do. That adults often need like a month and a half before a habit's really entrenched. Whereas a habit for a kid could be formed well enough that it would perpetuate itself after just maybe a week and a half or 2 weeks. Like they seem to, children love habits, they love rituals, they love traditions. And so they're quick to gravitate toward new traditions. So I think you might get a tantrum the first day that you said, "No, we're not doing that anymore," to anything that a child's accustomed to, but that it won't take all that long for a child to become habituated to something new. Like I would say that you have to be careful with that. You don't want to flout tradition too much with children. Like adults need to be reliable. Like a child needs to think of their parents as reliable. And if we thought of children having certain kind of rights in the home, I'm okay with thinking of any habit of the household as something nearly approaching a right of a child. Because there are certain things that you want children insisting on. And if you arbitrarily tell them no to any kind of entrenched habit or tradition, it's I think it's more damaging for a child to break tradition than it is for an adult to have to break a tradition. So if you want to be a known and trusted person, you have to establish the kind of habits that you can perpetuate long term. And so, yeah, I mean, you should recognize that anytime you cut a child off from something that's become habitual, it's going to be a big deal. And I think you got to strive to raise your kids in such a way that regular upheavals of the way that we do things here are just not happening.
I know one of the things, particularly within our audience, our community, is wanting to give their kids, especially good books, right? Fairy tales, rich stories, all of that. Stories that have stood that test of time, and they're wanting to introduce them. And a lot of families, that's something that's incorporated, it's embraced. Other families, it's more of a challenge, it's more difficult. Or even it's, how do we actually engage these stories? How do we actually participate with them? And I think you see a lot, obviously, the classical renewal, it's very pervasive, it's very expansive. And I know you're completely familiar with all of this, but I'm curious, what is our approach to actually, how do we interact with these stories? How do we engage them? And I'll preface it this way, because what I tend to hear a lot, particularly within the classical movement, that is, we need to know the worldview. Particularly, that is, we need to know the author's worldview. And so then we can know that going in somewhat armed and prepared, and before we actually engage it and interact with it. And I just wanted to know, how should we interact with these stories? Is it imperative that we know the worldview? Do we need to know the moral theme of the author or what the story is saying? I think that'd be really, really helpful. Just say, how do we actually interact with these stories?
Yeah, it's hard to put forward a program for interacting with all the books and all the films and all the songs that your kids are going to encounter, in the same way that I think it's a bit difficult to, well, let me give an analogy. If I, so I've taken many classes of students to New York to see museums that are in Manhattan, the Frick and the Metropolitan, and there are some teachers who want to turn a trip to the museum into like a lecture, and they want the trip to the museum to be educational, and they think that the only way that you can make it, they think that a trip to the museum is not educational in and of itself, and that the way that you make it educational is by talking at people like the entire time that they're at a museum. So if every now and again,
is it didactic, Josh?
Yeah, it's didactic. It's kind of neurotic, actually. This desire to constantly be talking about whatever you're looking at. That said, occasionally when I've led trips to New York, small groups of students have asked me if I want to walk around with them for a while. And normally when I go to New York, I tell everyone, like, don't be by yourself, but get a friend, get two friends, and go wherever you want to in the museum. I'm not going to determine what it is that you're going to see and how long you're going to spend in front of it. So I think if you train people well enough when they go to a museum, you can trust them well enough to just, wherever the spirit leads. What do you want to see? Do you want to see the Romantics? Do you want to see the neoclassicists? Do you want to see American art, European art? Go where you want to go. And if a group of 3 students asked me to walk around with them, I would. I wouldn't create some kind of program where I was talking about everything that the group stood in front of. But neither would I want to cut myself off from the ability to make a few comments as we were going from painting to painting, pointing out things to them that they probably couldn't see for themselves on a first viewing. But I wouldn't do it in a programmatic fashion. So I wouldn't say I'm obligated to say something interesting about every painting that we come to. but neither would I keep entirely silent the entire time that we're going around the museum. And what I decided was worthy of comment would really kind of depend on the response of the students to the painting that they're looking at, what they've responded to well before, what kind of questions they've asked me, and what I said about the paintings that we're standing in front of would be kind of emergent. There wouldn't be any plan that I was working off of. And the same is true in my home. There are times when I play a song for my kids and point some things out to them that I want them to notice. But most of the time I don't. Like, most of the time there's music playing. It's music that I either want to hear or want them to hear, or that they've asked to hear. And every now and again, we have a conversation about some song, some piece of music that's just played. But the opportunity for those conversations has to be seized on when it presents itself. But I don't take it as a matter of course that when we're done with a movie, we have to talk about it. When we're done with a book, we have to talk about it. And some of that's because I don't have a lot to say about a movie the second it ends. I liked it. I didn't like it. That might be it. And there may be an opportunity for a conversation about it later. There might not be. I don't take it as some kind of failure on my part as a father to not address every questionable claim that comes up in a movie the second the movie is over, or in the week that after the we finish watching a movie. Sometimes there are things that need to be addressed, or that I think will be beneficial to my kids to have a conversation about. But that doesn't happen all the time. So I don't have interesting things to say about a movie right when it's over. I don't expect other people to say interesting things about a movie the second it's over. And I look for moments just naturally that come up in a conversation to talk about what we've heard, what we've listened to, what we've read, what we've watched, when it seems fitting. But I don't take my responsibility. My responsibility as the father is to put good things in front of my kids. My responsibility is not to lecture at them about the good things that I put in front of them. My responsibility is to have interesting conversations with my kids and give my children the opportunity to refine their thought. But I'm not some goaltender that has to block all of the bad philosophy that tries to get into my home the second that it comes up. So, I mean, if you raise your children right, if you take them to church faithfully, and if you have good conversations in front of your kids, and you educate your children well, you send them to a good school, they're going to know at the end of a movie like The Truman Show that there was some good stuff in that movie, but not all of it was good. And we don't need to sit here and have a pros and cons conversation about it when it's over. We'll see if it comes up later, but I'm content that you saw the movie and that you saw a good movie. And my kids know that the fact that I'm showing them a movie doesn't mean that I'm putting some kind of stamp of approval over absolutely every last thing that occurred in it.
It reminds me of when we had the privilege this past spring of doing the Frankenstein book retreat with you. And
yes.
Well, it was spring, and then I get to be with you this fall here.
That's
very,
right.
Very, but I loved when we did Frankenstein. One, we just read it together. That was so neat to actually just read something together. I'm used to just, hey, read it back then or read it over here. Then we'll come back and discuss it. I actually think there's something actually incredibly fresh and exciting about just reading it together and actually having that shared experience, communal experience. But one of the things that I particularly loved about that, what you did is you actually didn't talk about the worldview of Frankenstein. Right. You didn't talk about the moral themes of Frankenstein. You maybe highlighted observations, but really what you did, Josh, is you brought us into the Frankenstein family household. You brought us into their traditions, their customs, their beliefs. You brought us into some pretty fractured relationships, is what we saw, particularly with a father and a son. That's really at the core of that story. But you really showed us the human relationships and the human progressions of those relationships that felt incarnate. It felt embodied. It felt holistic. That you then feel a sense of there's this morality on an imaginative level that you're gaining and acquiring through, like, ooh, that's, you feel it intuitively. That's good. Ooh, that's really bad. And that's going to go really south. What's
Right.
going here in isolation. I felt like I understood parenting, though Frankenstein isn't directly about parenting.
Right.
Right. And it wasn't like a moral tale, but it was just the fact that you actually brought us into the world of Frankenstein. That's what I said, the home of Frankenstein. I felt like I actually knew intuitively what the story was. And you didn't have to didact us.
Yeah. That's so. I heard this expressed very clearly by Andrew Zwerneman at a conference I was at last week at Belmont Abbey, and he made a comment that he made a very bold assertion about the teaching of literature that I found absolutely fascinating, and it rang true to me, even though I don't always live up to the truth of this claim that he made. And the claim that he made was great authors don't think in terms of themes. This is like, great authors don't sit down to write on a theme. The essence of a book, the essence of a novel, is all in the details, which are not themed. So I know what I know what the young teacher of Frankenstein means when they say that the book has a theme of human responsibility toward technological advancement. That's not some baffling thing that a young literature teacher would say. But I don't know that I would ever make that claim, because I don't think it actually clarifies anything in the book. I don't think it makes the book easy to understand. I don't think that thought occurred to Mary Shelley. I don't think that we're getting into her mind by reducing the book to themes and then looking for those themes. And that's a very easy way to teach a work of literature, which is why I think a lot of young teachers gravitate towards it. You write 3 themes on the board when you're starting a book. And then anytime anything in the story crops up that touches on those themes, you say, see, there's the theme. Like I told you, this was a theme. There's the theme. And what that tends to do is it creates this super tight little relationship where the lectures that you give explain the book, and the book explains the lecture, and you've got this tight little circle. Like, I'm going to tell you what this book is about, and then we're going to read it. And every time the book says what I said it's about, I'm going to say, see, that's what I told you it was going to talk about.
It's like, where's Waldo?
Yeah, it's the Where's Waldo approach. That's right. That's a great illustration. I love that. The Where's Waldo approach to teaching literature. This book is about technology, and we get to acclaim, a chapter in the book where there's some technology. See, technology. But that's really kind of how worldview training works with books too. You start off and say there's the author of this book had a Marxist worldview, and then you proof text this claim, and that's the relationship between the teacher and the book. The teacher makes claims, and then the book is used to proof text the claims that the teacher has made at the outset. And that, what that does is it gets you familiar with the book in a very certain kind of way. But I don't think that it gets you very deep into a book. I do like the way that Andrew Zwerneman put it. I do think that a book is about the details, that the details are what make a novel a novel. The details are what necessitate a novel being a novel, as opposed to an essay. That if a book could be reduced to its themes, or a novel could be reduced to its themes, just write the essay instead. Like, the details of a novel are what separate it from a work of nonfiction. and I think in order to understand a novel as a novel, you really have to luxuriate in the details. That's where true knowledge of the book comes, which is why I think you've got to read the book with your students. Reading the book with the students is a way is the only way for the student to encounter the book if the book really is about the details.
Well, that's Aristotle in Poetics, and then I think Lewis kind of repeats the point in Experiment and Criticism. Both talk about a story being an object of art, and that and the way it's art is conceptualized by the plot, right? And the plot presents to you an object, and that object is the piece of art that then is going to be making an impression on your soul, filling your imagination, cultivating your memory. And that is a very poetic act, what you're describing, right? To take the story in as this imaginative presentation of, you really can't fully get the story till you've seen the whole. You have to see really the journey of the soul that is, kind of thematic that we can see in many stories. And in some sense, I think you could say every story is echoing something about the journey of the soul. But I've always wanted to ask you, and so I'm excited to finally get the chance with poetic knowledge. As you know, poetic knowledge lies at the heart of the children's tradition. And so one thing I think that drew me and Patrick to your teaching style from the beginning is that you are an inherently poetic person. You frequently talk about, we're not going to analyze this, we're just going to experience it. I remember you doing an episode for classical teachers where you basically suggested that they shouldn't run to go and read a bunch of books about like the philosophy of classical education, but instead need to participate in the life of the school for a couple of years and get acclimated. These are all very poetic ideas. So I'm just curious, how familiar are you with Poetic Knowledge by James Taylor? And if that is a somewhat intentional outfleshing of those ideas or just circumstantial that you just happen to be kind of embodying those ideas in the way you've approached teaching yourself?
I read Poetic Knowledge at a impressionable period in my own teaching career. So I think I read Poetic Knowledge 12 years ago. I think I read it 12 years ago. And I was absolutely fascinated by it. So, I mean, the short answer to the question is yes, I am familiar with that book. Poetic Knowledge by James Taylor is one of those books that I would list up there with some of the most like misunderstood books on education that there are, and the reason why I don't regularly make reference to James Taylor is because most of the references that I hear to James Taylor are a misunderstanding of James Taylor. So James Taylor is a super cool person to reference. Integrated Humanities program is like in terms of flexing your classical bona fides, it's about as legit as it gets. But I have talked with so many people who run like these tawdry Socratic seminars, where the teacher and the students just like BS for 45 minutes. And there's some headmaster that's like, yeah, totally borrowed that from the IHP. Like, I have no idea what you're talking about. Like actually doing the kind of thing that was done in the Integrated Humanities program is, I'm going to be totally honest, not something that hardly anyone actually wants to do. Like, everyone wants to read this book. They want to talk about how amazing this book is. No one actually wants to do that. No one has time for that. No one's going to put money behind that. No one's like, I'm going to say no one. I mean, almost no one. Almost no one's really willing to go all in on that. And like you only have to look at how long the IHP lasted to see what most people think of it. Like if you're actually running a school that way, it's not going to last. Like modern people are not into that. It's this cool thing to talk about. It's this cool thing to reference. But I've met so many people who protest that their work or the way that they conduct things in their school is like heavily informed by James Taylor, and you actually see the way they're doing it. It's like, no, it's not. Like this is the most efficient, straightforward way of running a class imaginable. I have no idea why you're claiming that this is like some kind of offshoot of James Taylor. So I found the book Poetic Knowledge incredibly moving. But I have not found, I haven't found a whole lot of people that are actually willing to do that. The investment in time, the ability to run that kind of a thing, the trust in your teachers it takes to actually institute that in a school. Like no one trusts the average humanities teacher well enough to let them run a class the way that the IHP was run. It creates this incredible fascination with the teacher. And very few schools can handle having a really charismatic teacher that students follow the way that the teachers at the IHP were followed. So that's why I love James Taylor. I think he's the coolest. But I think that there's a lot of lip service paid to him that is not backed up with real practice. And to be honest, that's the reason why, like, I talked a lot about James Taylor in the couple years after I initially read Poetic Knowledge. But when I realized that there was just so much head nodding that wasn't backed up with real practice, I decided it was better to talk about the ideas than it was to reference him.
Oh, that's very fascinating. I think it explains something that I had experienced because our daughter is 10. I think the first time I heard Dr. Perrin speak was a year or two before she was born. And that was what caught my interest with classical education. So 11 or 12 years of me starting to learn about classical education, grow in my pedagogy once I was preparing to homeschool, all these things. And kind of like you said, I heard Poetic Knowledge referenced all the time. Like it was a footnote for the first 6-7 years that I was reading all these books and I would always see it mentioned. Yeah. And yet then when I went to the book itself, I was a little baffled because I was like, nobody's doing this though. Like this is, we all talk about it. Like it's a footnote, like, oh yeah, Poetic Knowledge by James Taylor. But then like I've heard people say, oh, well, that's not a complete pedagogy right there. I'm like, I mean, he was talking about high school through college. So, I mean, that's pretty complete. Like, and so they're kind of I feel like the common impression I get in maybe the broader classical world, I think your perspective is interesting because you've interacted with more of those upper years. But I've kind of heard people be like, oh, Poetic Knowledge. Yeah, that's like for kids, right? Or, so like, yeah, like preschoolers, they're into Poetic Knowledge, like the gymnastic and musical mode. Yeah, that's like what you do with your kids before they start formal lessons. And then real school starts. And I'm just like, at that point, you've just so divorced yourself from what James Taylor or John Sr. and the other IHP professors intended. Now, the one thing I'll say is, I do wonder if the tides are turning on that. I do wonder if now being a few decades into the classical renewal and seeing some of its most poignant failures, that I could be wrong about this, but my impression, even just with the people who are hungering after TCT, I'm going to go out there and say that I'm optimistic that TCT is faithful to the book only because Adam Taylor has read it and confirmed that for me.
Okay. That's a good sign.
So I got Adam's stamp, so I feel confident to say
it's a good starting point.
Yeah, I couldn't go to James. He's already, reposed in the Lord. So I'll take his stand. But all that to say, what is so fascinating to me is, when I went out to write the children's tradition, to say, what if we just like followed this all the way through? What if we actually did this with our first graders and our third graders? And I thought it would go to a few, maybe 100 people, right? I thought like a few people who are super niche like me will be into this, and and then that'll be it, and this will be my fun little side hobby, and here we are. And yet, what has been blowing my mind and the most encouraging thing is to see that I think people, I think it's a lot of factors. It's where the classical renewal is at. I think the post-COVID era, like all of these factors together mean that people are very open to reconsidering all of their past conceptions of education. They've seen how ineffective many of the, maybe we'll call them more neoclassical models, how they've been, that they don't often produce students with virtue, which of course is what John Senior warned about. He said, these great book schools are going to turn out a bunch of little sophists who can, they can make arguments, but they're not rooted in reality because they lack that poetic experience to ground them in the real. And yet, we're all living in this world of the machine where there is, I think, a remnant of people saying, you know what, we're done with the machine. We're done with this fake pseudo world. We're done with neoclassical. We want, show us in the tradition where things come from. And John Senior, people like James Taylor represent a wisdom about that ancient path that people are willing to kind of throw all their eggs into that basket, because at this point we can see, all those PhDs who are telling us that this is true classical education is following Dorothy Sayers or something, that hasn't always worked out the way they promised. So we're more open to consider alternatives.
Yeah, I think that that's a fine observation. There's I see over the last I think that there were the way that I characterize this is that classical education, as the term is commonly used today, begins in the late 80s, early 90s. It turns into a movement in the Obama years, and then it turns into an industry in the last 10 years. And in that move from being a movement to being an industry, there were a number of things about the movement phase that have gotten questioned in the industrial phase. And the prevalence of Dorothy Sayers is declining. There are a lot of aphorisms, there are a lot of slogans that were common during the movement era that are falling out of favor. For example, we teach kids how to think, not what to think. That used to be the sine qua non of classical education. No, I think that more and more headmasters, even the pitch masters, the people that are presenting classical education to the outside world, are using that turn of phrase less and less. And 15 years ago, 20 years ago, you could not read the About Us section or the About Classical Education tab on a school website. You could not go through a tour of a school with the admissions officer without hearing that. We teach kids how to think, not what to think. Whereas I hear more headmasters despairing of that claim, recognizing that it was never true to begin with, or that in as much as it was true, it was not a worthwhile goal. You have to teach kids how to think and what to think. You don't get to pick one or the other. It's a package deal. So I do see some of what you're referring to here, that there were certain things that provided incredible enrollment growth and generated huge interest in classical education, 10 to 15 years ago, that have changed. So the talking points have definitely evolved. Classical education isn't pitched the same way that it used to be. And so if there's room in the way that it's pitched now for James Taylor, John Senior, I think that's welcome news.
Well, and I suspect there always will be a type of establishment as classical education or whatever it is. But I think the beauty of being in the homeschool world is you kind of sometimes get to be more in touch with more grassroots type of just down to earth things. And I think in many ways that's what the IHP felt like when I met it. When I encountered it, was it's like the hippie version of classical education, right? It's down to earth. It's not fancy, right? That was, what is it? St. Aquinas's college was they're put down, right? Oh, isn't that cute? The IHP, doing their poetry and they're looking at stars. And yet I know in the soul hunger that so many of us are feeling today, I think even the simple things like reading poetry and looking at the stars and reading good books, because most of us aren't ready for the great books. It can feed our souls and prepare us for whatever God has in the days ahead. But thank you for answering that question. I've just always wondered.
She should have asked you at the book retreat last spring. We had all that time. And I'm sorry, you're just getting me this time.
Yeah.
So, you know.
Yeah, I'll be on baby duty.
There you go. Well, as always, thank you just so much for your time. I'd love for people to just be able to, where can they find just more of your work and what you're doing? I know you are a very busy man. So please, do share.
So my personal website, gibbsclassical.com, has all the classes that I teach. It has my pamphlets, recordings of conferences that I've done. And then the classicalteachinginstitute.org is the website where you can find out about the things that the Institute's doing, retreats that we're running. We offer coaching calls, a teacher cohort this year for young teachers. The Classical Teaching Institute has a lot of stuff going on, from in-person events to monthly. There's monthly online events, and then there's events that I do on the side of schools that have me come for a day or 2 days to deliver lectures or to walk faculty through a classical text. So either one of those places, gibbsclassical.com is my website. And then the classicalteachinginstitute.org is the Institute's website.
Fantastic. Well, we'll make sure to link those in. And when's your upcoming fall retreat? Because maybe some of our audience may be interested.
Upcoming fall retreat, yes, is November 14th and 15th in Meridian, Idaho.
Wonderful. And like I said, I'm going to be there. So there's
Can't wait, Patrick. It's going to be great.
It's going to be a great time. Well, thank you again to our audience. And Mr. Gibbs, thank you so much for coming on. We're so grateful you did.
Thank you.
Thank you for the invitation. Thank you so much.